history of Scandinavia and its people is written in the sea. Their names might be Einar, Knut, or Harald, names that seem to spring from Norse mythology. Their ancestors had names like Eric the Red and Leif the Lucky. The defiant prows of Viking boats are their link to the past and the present. 10 centuries ago, their fierce ancestors rode the oceans as pirates and plunderers. They come to harvest its riches and perhaps to satisfy some ongoing spirit of adventure and excitement. The modern Viking is still on the sea.
Hello, I'm Mike Farrell. Welcome to the best of the National Geographic specials. With each of these programs in the highly acclaimed series from the National Geographic Society, we embark on a richly rewarding adventure. Explore with us man's continuing quest for our world's hidden wonders, its enduring beauty and drama. Like the best of adventures, our journey of discovery ultimately takes us to a deeper understanding of ourselves. Vikings. The word alone was enough to conjure up terror throughout Europe when those seafaring warriors pillaged the continent. But that was 1,000 years ago. The spirit of the Norsemen has long departed. Or has it? Barbarian invaders no longer. The descendants of the Vikings still retain the fierce legacy of their ancestors, channeled now toward a different sort of conquest. Here are the Scandinavian fishermen, the last Vikings, triumphing in their battle against the sea.
Above the Arctic Circle along Norway's northwest coast lie the Lofoten Islands. With mountains still unscarred by industry and waterways free of modern commerce, the Lofotens are a vision of what northern Scandinavia's seacoast once was like. In the beginning, the people clinging to the northern coasts and fjords were primitive and isolated fishing tribes. Some have always remained peaceful and contented fishermen. Here in late winter, the waters are thick with spawning cod. Since the Stone Age, men have clustered along the rugged shores and looked to the sea for survival. From the beginning, fishing has been the basis of their life. On these northern islands, the brief summer is not a holiday, but a time to repair the scars of an Arctic winter. And it is a time to prepare the winter catch for shipment to nearby Sweden and as far away as Nigeria. Through the endless days of the midnight sun, the cod continues to dry until all the moisture is driven out and the fish is hard as rock. For hundreds of years, the cod has been prepared this way. Once it would have been carried to Spain and Italy in wooden sailing ships. Out of such fjords and harbors, shrouded by mist and mountains, out of Norway, Sweden, and Denmark, came the great seafarers of the north, the men the world remembers as the Vikings. By the 8th century, people of the north had become masters of the sea, and it was their gateway to the world. Unknown generations ago, the Viking ship evolved, shaped by artisans who passed their skills from sun to sun. Without blueprint, with eye and memory as their only reference, they still build boats with unmistakable Viking lines. To the Vikings and their descendants, a boat has always been a work of art, an expression of its creator, a piece of sculpture. The present-day boat builder still follows the same design, used to reconstruct a 1,000-year-old relic. The ship they reassemble was sunk by Vikings to protect the Danish town of Roskilde from enemy fleets. Scandinavian archaeologists and historians are not only rebuilding ancient structures, they are piecing together a true picture of the way their Norse ancestors lived. Constructed along the lines of a ship, a reproduced barracks at Trelleborg, Denmark, stands by the site of a massive Viking fortress. Ringed by an earthen rampart 55 feet thick, the military encampment was built about the year 1000. Inside the boat-shaped barracks, 1,200 Viking warriors honed their spears, mended shields, and prepared a well-planned invasion of England. To recapture their Viking heritage, a group of Danes built an authentic Viking ship, using Viking tools and traditional designs. And so across the North Sea their ancestors came, terrorizing the known world for 2.5 centuries. Triggered by a population explosion and internal strife, men of Norway, Sweden, and Denmark swarmed out of Scandinavia in quest of land and wealth. In their language, Viking meant piracy and plunder, and they became the Vikings. From the British Isles to Russia, Europe prayed, "From the fury of the Northmen, deliver us, O Lord." Across the northern seas, they pushed westward to Iceland and Greenland, the world's largest island, colonized by Eric the Red. They sailed across thousands of miles of unknown seas and oceans. They founded settlements in Ireland and France. They established trade from Morocco to Byzantium. And before the 10th century ended, Leif the Lucky had stepped ashore in North America. The Vikings were the first European colonists in America. Early in the 11th century, they built a settlement in the new land they called Vinland and remained 3 years. For centuries, historians have speculated about Vinland. But in 1962, a Norwegian scholar unearthed Viking ruins on the northern tip of Newfoundland. Throughout their age of conquest, they were obsessed warriors. They believed they earned their place in paradise by a glorious death in battle. It was a celebration when a dead Viking chief was burned with his ship and sent to Valhalla. Perhaps it was the coming of Christianity which destroyed their passion for battle and death. By the middle of the 11th century, their power had waned. The age of the Vikings was over. On the southern coast of Sweden, the Vikings left their own memorial to the glorious age. Beneath massive tombstones shaped like ships lie the remains of once feared Norsemen. Their gravestones are a monument to the civilization which perished here long centuries ago. Since the end of the Viking Age in 1066, the beaches of Scandinavia have never again been the launching sites for invasions of distant lands. Like the Vikings' earliest ancestors, many of their descendants have turned again to the sea in peace. Time and technology have wrought their changes, but men of southern Sweden are still fishermen. Throughout the weeks of summer, they work to erect a forest of timbers to support their almost endless nets. All this in preparation for the great migration of the eels. After a few brief weeks of summer, the coast is left to the fishermen and their nets. Stretched hundreds of feet out into the Baltic Sea, the finely meshed nets become barriers to block the eels' passageway and to drive them into smaller capture nets. In early autumn, the Baltic comes alive. Unseen in the turbulent water, millions of eels are a living current winding toward the North Sea and on into the Atlantic. The Swedish fishermen depend on one of nature's greatest mysteries. Now is the time when eels migrate from all over northern Europe to their spawning grounds in the Sargasso Sea near the island of Bermuda. On a day such as this, with a strong wind off the Baltic, the eels are driven into shore and into the maze of nets. Despite their heritage of the sea, their skill and planning, they still depend on a fisherman's luck. A day's catch may be anything from a single eel to 10,000 pounds. Eels caught in large numbers often suffer shock and die if left too long in the boat. They are rushed to floating chests. Here they are kept alive in their own environment until the buyer's boat arrives. Like farmers of the sea, they have sole rights to the stretch of fishing lots bounded by their nets. The eels trapped in their waters are theirs alone, their yearly harvest. They still lay claim to the sea. Since Europe's dark ages, North seamen have hunted the great whales. From open boats, they challenged the largest animal on Earth. The romantic days when hunter and hunted were evenly matched are long gone, and this memorial marks their passing. To the people of Sandefjord, this statue is a reminder. Their town was once the nerve center of Norwegian whaling activities in the Antarctic. At that time, almost everyone in Sandefjord was involved with whaling in one way or another. Captain Nils Larsen first went to sea and down to the Antarctic in 1915. He commanded a whaling vessel for 11 years until retiring in 1966.
I miss the whaling very much. We used to go down to the Antarctic during the winter time, and in summertime we spent here in Sandefjord. And now I'm just taking care of the house and garden and help my wife. Washing dishes, go shopping. You have nothing else to do.
Once a week, Larsen and other whalers gather at their club. Captains, mates, harpooners. Men who sailed together from Norway to the Antarctic.
She has only one... How many wheels did you have on deck at that time?
From deck boy to captain, Nils Larsen remained at sea for over a half a century. His glory days are over. Little is left but memories. Modern whaling began with the invention of an explosive head harpoon by a Norwegian in the 1860s. In 1904, the first land-based whaling station was established by Norway on South Georgia Island. Other nations soon followed. Throughout the Antarctic summer, whales were brought in and processed. Finback up to 80 feet long, right whale, a massive baleen, and oil for lamps, candles, and soap. And there was the blue whale, the largest animal ever to live in the sea or on the land. Sandefjord was where Norway's Antarctic whaling expeditions began and ended.
During the period of whaling, Sandefjord was a very, very busy place towards the end of the summer.
Nils Olsson managed a whaling station for 10 years.
And in this area, the factory ships were tied up for repairs and fitting out for the next season. We had ships alongside the jetty here, over on the other side, and 5 or 6 factory ships further inside the bay. A couple of thousand men were occupied fitting out these ships, and there was great traffic on the waters with launches, ferries, and all kinds of small craft. We had people coming from the areas around town to go on board with their gear. There were supplies to go on board, and there was a tremendous activity through the whole summer.
The voyage they were about to undertake would be different from all the others. In 1965, this was to be one of the last Norwegian whaling armadas to sail to the Antarctic. They would be gone for half a year. The trip south would take a month. A 10,000-mile journey from the top of the world to the bottom. Southern seas had been dominated not long ago by Norwegian whaling fleets. At times, as many as 12 factory vessels, each accompanied by 10 to 15 smaller boats, hunted the Antarctic waters. Now, a lone factory ship and a small escort of whale catchers approached the ice for one final kill. Once a whale was sighted, the harpooner directed the chase. Weighing as much as 100 tons were hauled in by the ship's powerful winch. The animal was pumped full of air to keep it from sinking and marked for the buoy boat, which would tow them to the factory ship. Hunting in the Antarctic continued unabated until the 1930s. When Norway set the first restrictions on killing whales. This was the initial step that led after World War II to the establishment of international limits. For the first time in decades, Gunners were no longer on their own. Operations were directed by the factory ship's manager, who aimed the hunting ships to their target areas each day. From the smaller hunting ships, the quarry had to be transferred to the factory. There the whales would be flensed, stripped of blubber, and processed. A season's catch was expected to yield up to 100,000 barrels of oil. Few men know Antarctic whaling, like Niels Olsen.
The top deck was the flensing deck. Here the whales were taken up in one piece, up by the slipway. The whale could weigh 70 to 100 tons, and we could have 4 or 5 whales up on the deck being flensed for blubber and cut to pieces and fed into big holes in the deck into the steam cookers. We had tanks, oil tanks, in the hull of the ship. We had a tank deck combined as a factory deck with a lot of processing machinery. Whaling went on all around the clock, and it was hard work, but they worked up a very efficient routine, and they could disintegrate 20 whales in a shift, a 12-hour period.
Norwegians, Dutch, British, then Japanese and Russians. Over the years they slaughtered Antarctic whales, often as many as 40,000 a season. Entire species nearly vanished. As the whales began to disappear, men like Niels Olsen became concerned.
We were aware of that whaling could not go on. We were certainly overfishing. However, the catch was strictly limited by international agreement, so we went on until it was too great an economical risk to put out an expedition.
The great whaling fleets are gone from Sandefjord. The factory ships, the whale catchers, their captains and crews are but cherished memories for a city that had grown and prospered on whaling. Today, Sandefjord is home to new industries and to tankers and cargo ships that travel the world. What of whaling? Will it ever return?
I do not think the whaling will come back again. In our time, maybe after 50 years or so, there would be whales enough to start industrial whaling. However, I think a whale should be protected now for a very long time.
In the land of the midnight sun, modern Scandinavians carry on a Viking tradition as they prepare to celebrate an ancient festival. This is the day of longest sunlight, the beginning of summer, and on the island of Godoy off Norway's west coast, the young gather fuel to build bonfires. The summer lord and lady usher in midsummer night. This is a joyous occasion, a chance for the island's inhabitants to come together to celebrate the out of doors. Their pagan ancestors paid homage to the sun and believed that bonfires would help renew its energy. For this is the time the sun reaches its highest point in the sky. people believed that without their help, the sun would fail to warm the earth. And everywhere in Europe, ancient people saw the sun's change of course as a moment of great significance. The Vikings saw every event a bit above the ordinary, as the occasion for a celebration. In this, their descendants haven't changed. For some, the open sea beyond the fjords and harbors of Godoy is a living memory of a life that's past. For others, it holds the promise of the future. Captain Ingvald Dub, for 45 years, sailed the great fishing banks from Norway to the Greenland Sea. Someday, his grandson hopes to do the same. Arnvid Dub, the old man's eldest son, is now captain of the family vessel. Returning from 3 weeks of fishing off the Shetland Islands, he is welcomed home by his son and father. Its mission not yet over, the ship passes within sight of homes and families, steaming to the Norwegian mainland with its catch. The Dub family's vessel Leicestershire is one small part of Norway's fishing fleet, just one of hundreds of family-owned boats that fish the waters from Spitsbergen to Greenland, from Newfoundland to Africa. For this colorful armada, the final destination is Ålesund, one of the largest fishing ports in Norway. The Leicestershire ties up along with other ships at the cooperative, which will sell their catch. It has some 60 tons aboard to be sorted as it's unloaded. Large blue ling for Swedish Christmas meals. The smaller ling, white and blue, will be salted and sent to Spain, Brazil, and Portugal. Since the days of sails and wooden hulls, the Dubs have plied the northern seas, from the fishing banks to Ålesund and home to the island of Godoy. For generations, their boats have been their pride, the means of their existence. And home port is a village which bears the family name, the tiny town of Dub. For those who sail and those who wait ashore, moments together are precious. In Dub, a family reunion becomes a holiday. The sea provides the feast and the cause for celebration. In this village, the ebb and flow of life is determined by the sea. With the ship in port, 3 generations are drawn together at the retired captain's home. On the Norwegian island of Godoy, a single family has its own Thanksgiving for a good catch and a safe return. The feast shatters an old Viking tradition. At this table, there is no alcohol, ever. Ingvald Dub would not tolerate it, and none would dare oppose him. Younger men now rule the family's fortunes on the open sea. But at this table, the older generations are still held in great esteem. For it is they who have passed on to their sons the life inherited from their fathers. These family gatherings are rare, for the men spend most of their lives at sea. For perhaps 500 years, on some small boat in the North Atlantic, men named Dub have lived and worked together, day after day, year after year, isolated on their own tiny, bobbing world. Now there are 10 of these men named Dib, still facing the sea, their ancient enemy and their only provider. 350 miles from Norway's coast and midway to Iceland, the men of the Dib family prepare the lines and bait the hooks. The Leicestershire begins to prowl the North Atlantic in search of cod. 1,000 years ago, their Viking ancestors crossed this angry sea to Iceland, navigating by the sun and the stars. Now they use electronics, not only to maintain their course, but to pursue their prey. The echo sounder helps detect the schools of fish. And the technology of man is verified by nature's timeless signal, hungry gulls from the nearby Faroe Islands. To mark the beginning of the run, a buoy is dropped, weighted with a small anchor. The Leicestershire does not use a trawl, but feeds out hundreds of yards of baited line marked by floating buoys. Below decks, the line with hooks every few feet is carefully played out, while the boat maintains its course and speed. Marked by buoys and dragged down by anchors, the line settles on the bottom, while the ship moves on to lay out other runs of baited line. After finishing the final run, the first lines, which may have been out for hours, are finally hauled in. The first deck team is Harald Dub and Asbjørn Dub, father and son. This is the life of the Leicestershire's men, out to sea for 2 or 3 weeks at a time, 3 or 4 hours of sleep a night, back to Ålesund to unload, then home to Dub for a while. For most of the year, they fish in winter waters that are stormy and unpredictable, and in the summer they are often plagued by fog. This is their life winter and summer, from youth to old age. Without a wasted motion, this operation will go on for hours as one man replaces another. Like some strange relay team in a fisherman's Olympics, they race against time to clear the hooks of valuable cod and worthless skate, to rebait the lines and to rush them over the sides again. The sooner the hold is filled, the sooner they head for home. Through the weeks on a desolate sea, the men regard the gulls as companions, other living creatures who depend upon the fish for life. In the midst of the fishing run, Andreas Dub, the ship's engineer, becomes worried by a persistent knocking in the engine. The speed of the ship is drastically reduced. Captain Arnvid is told by Andreas, his uncle, that the engine must be checked, a task which cannot be carried out at sea. They decide to run for port in the Faroe Islands. Though it means 2 days fishing lost, the Leicestershire hoists the Faroe Islands flag and heads for Tórshavn Harbor. Unintentionally, these modern Norsemen have retraced one of the earliest voyages of their forefathers. At the turn of the 8th century, Vikings from the coast of Norway first sailed into the Faroe Islands. Here some settled and founded the civilization which thrives today. "400 miles from Scandinavian shores, these rugged islands were settled by Vikings from the coast of Norway. Now nominally a part of Denmark, the men of the Faroes have their own language, flag, and currency, and their own traditions, culture, and individual lifestyle. In the 9th century, when Vikings first landed on these Atlantic islands, they found Irish hermits tending sheep. They drove out the hermits, but kept the sheep. Today, the islands are called the Faroes, the Sheep Islands, and there are more than 70,000 of these animals, almost twice the human population. These animals are vital to the islanders. Their wool clothes them. Their meat, fresh, salted, or dried, feeds them. In the summer, sheep are rounded up to be wormed, treated for sickness, and sheared. For the young, it has always been a special time. Now, after 1,000 years, some of the young are no longer content to be sheep herders. Many are leaving the herds, the land, and the past to the old. In a strange way, tradition remains a part of the Faroes' economy. In the mid-19th century, these looms provided yarn for nearly 100,000 hand-knit sweaters treasured in the fashionable shops of Europe. Now, these people whom time has forgotten are masters of a vanishing craft. Responding to challenges centuries old, young Faroese still thrill to ancient Viking sports. As they skim across Tórshavn Harbor, their traditional high-prowed racing boats are symbols of how little life has changed here. But in the days ahead, some will make one final trip across Tórshavn Harbor and leave the Faroe Islands forever. To other generations, the sea is not a means of escape, but a source of life. With a decoy, they hunt the guillemots, the diving waterfowl which flourishes in the northern seas. When the birds try to land on the pitching, well-trapped board, their feet are caught in wire snares. To these older islanders, it has never occurred that there is anywhere else to live. Here you can always live off the sea and the land, off the fish and the birds. The island's endless volcanic cliffs, pockmarked with crevices and lined with ledges, form a monumental nesting ground. A breeding place for species from north and south, these islands comprise one of the greatest bird concentrations in the world. Over 200 species, millions of wild birds. Each year, a unique variety of hunter invades the cliffs. The vertical cliffs rise up nearly 2,000 feet from the pounding surf. In their traditional mountaineering apparel, the egg snatchers clamber over these treacherous cliffs for 9 days, a time limit set to allow the birds to lay other eggs and survive. In June, the ledges are filled with millions of freshly laid eggs, from the guillemots and razorbills, gannets, shearwaters, stormy petrels, and countless others. Each group of birds finds its own niche in the cliff walls. Men still lose their lives pursuing this age-old tradition and sport. The eggs they hunt are a delicacy, a food supplement for winter, when the diet is meager and unvarying. Isolated for centuries, the rugged men of the Faroes are the direct descendants of history's legendary seafarers. Through their veins still courses the blood of the Vikings. They are a dramatic reminder that these towering isles of rock have created a uniquely independent breed of men. Untouched by the outside world, a way of life has survived beyond its time. These rugged northern islands are a last remaining outpost of the Viking spirit. The sea has shaped Scandinavia's character and history. A Norwegian once said, "What would we be without the sea? A handful of people on a pile of rock. It is the sea that unites us." Even today, the young people of Scandinavia are never far from the smell of the sea or from its memories. These Norwegian children read the great sagas of the Norsemen. They know of Viking conquests, of explorers and navigators and fishermen. Many of their parents and grandparents still live off the sea. And 80% of Norway's people are clustered in towns and villages along a 2,000-mile coastline. Yet for the young, the future holds other promises in a world that has already changed. As long as there are ships in the harbors and oceans of the world, Scandinavians will be manning them, for the destiny of many will always lie with the sea. The flags of the modern Norsemen proclaim a continuing mastery of the oceans and symbolize a way of life that has lasted for over 1,000 years. Now the Norsemen no longer come as conquerors. The warlike Vikings have passed into history. But to their descendants, they bequeath the legacy that time cannot seem to change: a love for the sea.
Those intrepid descendants of the Vikings who now inhabit the Faroe Islands and the waters between Iceland and Great Britain have prospered in a rugged environment. The government-supported fishing industries played a significant role in that prosperity. The growing population of the Faroe Islands, 46,000 at last count, enjoys one of the highest per capita incomes in all of Europe. Next time on the Best of the National Geographic Specials, we'll explore another corner of the endlessly rewarding and surprising world around us. I'm Mike Farrell for the National Geographic Society.